If you go into a ride dehydrated, no matter how much you drink on the bike, your body is not going to be replenishing its tissues properly. You will be in a deficit and you will be chasing that dehydration probably for the next day, maybe up to the next 2 or 3 days. So certainly you want to go into your rides hydrated. And how do you do that? Well, you start with around 30 to 35 mLs per kg. So if you take your body weight, divide it roughly by 2.2 for those of you who have devices or smartphones on you. And you multiply it by 30 to 35 mLs per kilogram. And you get a nice big number, somewhere around 2,000. My guess would be somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. And that would be your everyday fluid needs. And that's enough to meet, our bodies are over 80% water, so that it's enough to kind of keep your body in equilibrium so you stay nice and cool. You can also stay nice and warm. It allows good tissue perfusion, so your mouth isn't dry, your eyes aren't dry, your skin is nice and hydrated, and our brains float in water, so you can appreciate what happens when there's not enough water for the brain. Those are your office mates or your friends or family that get really grumpy. Offer them some water next time. It does wonders actually quite quickly. And there's a great research study about 3 years ago done on both amateur and also professional athletes, and athletes of all different calibers and all different sports actually. Most of it was done on basketball players, but it's also football players, cyclists, and triathletes. And what they found is that just a slight change in your weight from before your ride and after your ride, just a slight weight change, reflects dehydration. That can result in a significant decline in your performance. Performance meaning not just physical performance, not just how many watts you're pushing, how many METs you're pushing, but also your qualitative performance, meaning how much did you enjoy your ride, when did you perceive that you were getting tired. So the perception of fatigue is significantly declined. So for example, my husband weighs about 165 pounds, which is roughly 75 kg. So if over a 2-hour ride he comes back and he weighs about 3 pounds less, his performance probably suffered by about 5%. So over a 2-hour ride, probably about 6 minutes he suffered, if he's looking at his time and that's his marker. And I can spot right away when he comes back when he's dehydrated, generally because he's very grumpy, and in his walk over to where he aligns his Garmin with his Garmin software, whatever that is, how they talk to each other, he usually comes by and gives me a kiss and then goes straight to the machine. If he's dehydrated, I get no kiss. So that's how I figured it out. So let's talk individual hydration needs on the bike. So let me back up. The last slide, which is everyday nutrition, everyday hydration, you need about 30 to 35 mLs per kg every day. On average, give or take, every day. So for him, that's about almost 3 liters. So those liter water bottles, I think someone has one up there, it's about 3 of those a day. And when I say fluid, it doesn't have to be water, it can be fluid. And much to the chagrin of many healthcare providers out there, we now know that coffee counts. So all of you Phil's fans can cheer because coffee now counts. So coffee, tea count as fluid, and your juices, your soups, all of those things count as well. Probably one of the best indicators of hydration, since I don't want anyone to go home and count the milliliters of fluid that they drink, is the color of your urine. Right? The lighter it is, the better. And the darker it gets, the more dehydrated you are. If you have kind of lemon-colored urine, you are probably dehydrated and probably have been for about 12 to 18 hours already. Right? So take a look in the bowl. It's a really good barometer of your hydration status. And that includes when you come back from a ride, your urine should still be very nice and light-colored. It's a great barometer. So let's talk a little bit of numbers here to help you figure out exactly what you need on a ride. Best way to do it is a sweat rate. Right? It's something that you can do at home. And this is something that you don't have to do if you're out there for recreational rides less than an hour. But if you're out riding for more than an hour, if you're riding at high intensities, if you're doing some hill climbing, if you are in heat, or if you're if you're a multi-sport athlete, I do recommend doing a sweat rate just to kind of get a grasp on how many kgs you need, what kind, if you want to space out. If you're going to use fluid on the course to see how many miles apart the aid stations are, this is a really helpful tool. So you take your pre-ride weight, like let's say you're going to go on a ride at 8 in the morning. Before you go eat breakfast, you hop on the scale and you look at your weight. All right, you come back from your ride, you check your weight. And I've got two numbers, so you subtract those ones from each other, and you multiply it by 16 ounces, which is approximately how much fluid is in 1 kg. Then you take that number, which is probably pretty darn small, I'm hoping, and you're going to add all the fluids that you drank during your ride. So if you had 2 water bottles, you have 2 kgs on your bike, each water bottle is generally 20 ounces. Right, there are some water bottles that are up to 28 or so, but most of them are 20-ounce bottles. Some of them are 24 if you can fill them all the way to the very top, but for spillage and whatnot, we say 20 just to be safe, but if you can do it, go with 24. And so you add those two together, and you get how many ounces you've had, or how long you've been riding, and it's based on hours, not minutes. So then basically you do a little dividing, so you do A plus B, you get that total, you divide it by the hours of ride. That's how much fluid approximately that you need per hour. So an example here, my husband goes out on a 2-hour ride, he lost a kilogram and a half. We multiply that by the fluid it's going to take to replace that, we get 24 ounces. And then he drank 40 ounces, so he drank two bottles of water on his ride. So over 2 hours, he's had 64 ounces left his body in the form of fluid, and he's taken in 40 ounces. So we have a total of 64 ounces divided by 2 hours, so 32 ounces per hour. Right? So what this is telling me is that he comes back dehydrated. Right? This is what's recommended by the ACSM. And there's some insensible losses as well. So based on this, you can kind of come up with how many ounces of fluid that you need to take with you, or that you need to find on your ride. Right? Temperature change generally increases your fluid needs, and we don't have a set calculation, so there's not necessarily a positive correlation between temperature and fluid needs that we can actually quantify, so to speak, but generally, absolutely. And you'll see that because you'll probably be losing more weight right on your ride. And so certainly if you're riding in the Bay Area in a temperate climate and you're going to go to Colorado Springs and do some riding, you're certainly going to want to do your sweat. You can recalculate your sweat rate anytime you'd like. So this is just a sample of the hydration schedule that's been recommended by the ACSM, which is the American College of Sports Medicine, for cycling. 1 to 2 hours before, we're hoping that you get in at least 2 to 3 cups of fluid. Again, it doesn't have to be water. 2 to 3 cups of fluid in an hour or 2 hours before you ride. Then right before you ride, 30 minutes, maybe in the car ride to the parking lot where you're going to ride, or while you're getting ready, you want to sip another at least 1 to 2 cups of fluid, or 8 to 16 ounces. If you're planning on going on a long ride, again, long ride being defined as over 60 minutes, you probably want to look at maybe substituting that water with some kind of carbohydrate source. So you might be wanting to do half juice, half water. You might want to switch to a Gatorade or something with a little bit of carbohydrate. Again, that only applies if you're going to be riding for longer than an hour. And then again, if you're going longer for an hour, you probably want to be sipping on something every 15 minutes on your ride. And I know this is a really tough number to swallow on the bike. It's very hard for me to do that, and I can appreciate how it's very difficult to add this new habit, but it certainly is a habit that can be formed, but it does take effort. Oftentimes we recommend using, like if you have a cyclometer, every 5 miles is generally about 15 minutes or so, depending on how fast you're going. But about every 5 miles on your cyclometer is a good way to go, need to drink something. I need to have a gulp or two of water, right? And then within an hour after you come back from your ride, we'd like you to have another at least 3 to 4 glasses of water or fluid again. And it sounds like a lot, and I can appreciate that. And water is weight, and most cyclists don't want to carry a lot of weight on them. And I know that's a big barrier as well. But I think that if you tried it, if you were a guinea pig on yourself just about 2 or 3 times, I think that you would want to continue the habit, because again, you'd feel better, you'd recover faster, and you'd certainly be able to go faster, harder, and longer. So how to hydrate? So I just mentioned some barriers there. General rule of thumb, drink 4 to 6 times an hour. It's a great way to get in adequate amounts of fluid. So sports drinks versus water drinks on the ride, versus water on the ride, excuse me. It's quite controversial. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to personal preference and flavors. A lot of people don't like a lot of the sweetened beverages out there, and they'd rather do it with food. Right? You can either eat your carbohydrates or you can drink them. Again, this mostly applies to cyclists who are riding for longer than an hour. If you are riding longer than an hour, ACSM and every other sports body out there does recommend some kind of fluid that contains carbohydrate. Alright, so switching over to a Gatorade, a Powerade, and a Celerade, some of Hammer's drinks out there, you can make your own. There's plenty of websites out there for pennies on the dollar. You can make delicious homemade tasting carbohydrate drinks. But not only do you want to replace the electrolytes that are being lost through your sweat and that your muscles are using, but also the carbohydrates and some of the electrolytes in those drinks actually help your body absorb the fluid that you're trying to drink. So it actually grabs the fluid and helps get it into the gut and into the tissues a little bit faster than if it was just water by itself. We find that the energy distribution to the cells in the tissue increases significantly. So practice hydration proficiency, aka try to form a new good habit around hydration. It takes time, it's not easy, you're not going to get it every time. In fact, I've gone out on rides and completely forgot water bottles. I think most of us have done that at some point. But, certainly, again, try to be a guinea pig for yourself, and at least a couple times really try some of the guidelines that I'm recommending. I think that you'll find it extremely beneficial. So some of the things we talk about doing with some of the triathlon teams that I coach is we talk about practicing, grabbing your water bottles during rides, especially like on hill climbs or in pelotons. It's not easy. It takes some skill to do that. You're certainly not going to drink if you don't feel comfortable grabbing your bottles and switching them and what have you. Switching hands, that can be a tough thing. Swapping cages, use of jersey pockets if you have hydration in there. And then timing is really big. So we try to say drink before you're thirsty. If you wait till you're thirsty on the ride, your urine's probably already getting dark, you're probably already dehydrated, you're certainly not at peak hydration during your ride. So along that line, which sports drinks are best? And there's some really narrow guidelines that the research has given us to choose our carbohydrate enhanced fluids. And those are that if you're riding between 0 to 3 hours, we really want you to have a carbohydrate source that's mixed in the type of sugars it contains. So we want a carbohydrate source that has glucose, fructose, sucrose, maltodextrin, or other kinds of glucose polymers. We find that the mixture of carbohydrates greatly enhances energy distribution in the body and also fluid absorption. So when you look on the back of a goo, or you look on the, a Powerade scoop, or if you look on the back of Gatorade, it will actually list the ingredient label. And what I'd like you to look for the next time you put one of those things up, if you do, is to make sure that there's different types of sugars. It shouldn't just say just glucose or just sucrose or just high fructose corn syrup. Right? It should be a mixture of different kinds of sugars. We also want to make sure that it's about a 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution. Now, does it say that on the label? Absolutely not, which is why I've listed some examples here for you. We'd also like it to have some sodium in there. 75 milligrams is really a drop in the hat. It's not much whatsoever. And the other types of electrolytes like potassium, chloride, are even smaller generally in most of these foods, but you don't need much if you're going between 0 and 3 hours. Again, certainly depends on intensity, temperature, hill climb, some of those things. But as a general rule of thumb, some of the examples here all fit the bill. I've kind of done most of the work for you. There's a lot of marketing. Clearly, there's a lot of marketing involved in sports supplements, sports drinks, sports foods, and most of them have advertised with the mindset that more is better. And that is certainly not the case when it comes to carbohydrates and fluid intake. More is not better on the bike. And I'm sure many of you have gone out for the belly-busting burrito and then hopped on your bike and found that out very quickly. So we know that more is not better, and it's the case with carbohydrates. It's the case with sodium, potassium, some of the other electrolytes, even in the fluids. Moving on, if you're an endurance racer or if you're a multi-sport racer, doing some of the longer courses, the same idea applies with ingredients. You want the mixed carbohydrates still. You certainly want some sodium in there because your sweat rate is probably greater. So our parameters change a little bit, and so our examples also change a little bit. And a key to look at packages and on the foods is what they're going to start saying endurance on them, or long-lasting energy. And those are some good signs that it's probably geared towards the more endurance athlete. If you take that when you're doing the 0 to 3 hours, is it going to hurt you? No, but it's probably not going to optimize your performance by any means. In fact, it could slow you down a little bit. The 0 to 3, the 3 hour and greater drinks tend to be a little bit more concentrated, and so they can cause a little bit of GI upset if you're not adequately hydrated with them. And generally the people that are doing more than 3 hour rides are folks that are paying attention to their hydration levels beforehand. But are they going to hurt you? Probably not. If you do have those at home and you want to use them for shorter rides, I'd recommend probably diluting them, maybe 50-50 with water, and then half of the concentrated version.
Differences, there's more electrolytes in the...
No, there's more everything. There's going to be more carbohydrates, there's going to be more electrolytes, and there might be a little bit of protein added. Absolutely. And we'll get into that in the fueling portion in just a moment. Good question. All right, so let's switch now from hydration over to fuel. So how much do I get to eat every day? So we're going to do kind of the same idea with fuel as we did with fluids. The first is, what's your everyday calorie needs? Right? And it helps to be able to contrast and compare your everyday needs versus your needs on the bike. And keeping in mind that your everyday needs, most of us spend 90+% of the time off the bike. Right? So you can appreciate that you're paying attention to your everyday needs is significant, much more so than the time spent on the bike. Certainly if you're looking for weight management, weight loss or weight gain. But so that 90% or plus time that we're spending off the bike, our calorie needs are much less, right? They're around 30 to 35, which is a similar number of the fluid, calories per kilogram. Right, that's a really simplified version. If you're looking for a little bit more in-depth numbers, things that take into account your height, your weight, your gender, your age, and your activity level, then you might want to look at a couple other equations. I didn't list them here, but Harris-Benedict is an equation that many of us are familiar with, and what a lot of fitness applications use, or smartphone apps, a lot of websites use it, the kind where you put in your information, it spits out a number really quickly. They're probably using Harris-Benedict. Personally, I don't love Harris-Benedict. It's been proven to have about a 30% error in it. Certainly if you're an outlier, so to speak, so if your weight is a little on the high end, or your weight's on the low end, or if you're a little too tall, or if your age, heaven forbid, is on either side of normal. Harris Benedict might not be a good fit for you. A better fit would be something called the Mifflin St. Jeor, or MSJ. A lot of websites are now starting to switch over to using that equation. If you know your percent body fat, there are other equations like the Cunningham equation. If you know your METs, if you know your watts, there are other equations for that. So there are many different calorie expenditure calculations that exist, and Harris Benedict, or 30 to 35 kcals per kilogram, is kind of the most popular ones out right now. So for example, if you're a 75 kilogram person and you do 30 to 35, you get roughly 22.25 to 26.25 calories a day. If you did Harris Benedict on the same exact person who now was Harris Benedict, would actually use height, use some other anthropometrics, we get 2,400 calories, which is pretty much smack dab in the middle of 30 to 35. And it's just an estimate, right? These are just rough estimates to see where we're at. So on an everyday basis, what kind of fuel do you need? Again, meaning most of your time when you're off the bike, what kind of fuels do you need? 60 to 70% carbohydrate. If you are an endurance athlete, I don't know how many of you are, or if you are a competitive cyclist or a competitive multi-sport person, or perhaps you're a swimmer or what have you, you're probably looking at the higher end there, so at least 70% carbohydrate, up to 80%. So, Tour de France, some of those cyclists, Tour de California, we're really pushing 80% carbohydrate. So if you've got a plate, 80% of that plate is carbohydrate. Right? That's different than the everyday person who needs closer to 50 to 60%. Again, carbohydrate being the preferred fuel source for aerobic activity. So if this person here were to come into my office, I'd recommend around 2,400 calories, 360 grams of carb, 55 grams of fat, 120 grams of protein, spread evenly throughout the day. And what I'd do, I'd give them a meal plan so that they don't have to count numbers, but they can kind of interpret it into food. So moving along, let's look at pre-ride fueling. And the goal here is really to top off your natural stores of energy in the body, which come from your liver and your muscle glycogen. Glycogen is really stored carbohydrate. It's instant energy that's available to your muscle tissues when you're doing aerobic activity. So 3 to 4 hours before a ride, you need around 800 calories. That sounds shocking to most people. Most people are like, Heather, my event's at 8 a.m. I'm not going to wake up at 5 and eat 800 calories. Shocking. I can guarantee you competitive cyclists do this. My husband annoyingly wakes up at about 3 a.m. before Wildflower and scarfs 2 giant, and he's half asleep. He drinks 2 glasses of orange juice. He eats a giant bagel with jam all over it, and usually a coffee or something like that, to try to get in enough calories to kind of fuel up and top off his glycogen scores. He goes back to bed. We're in the car. We're camping. We get up in the morning. He eats another about 300 calories, so generally like a bowl of cereal, some milk, and he usually starts doing some gels and goos at that time. But your focus before your rides is high carb. Right? You leave the high fat, that all the Mediterranean diet stuff that's out in the news right now, you leave that in the wayside, and you let Dr. Atkins turn over in his grave, because you're going carbs. You're hitting carbs hard before your pre-ride, right? You're topping off your fuel sources. If you're going only for an hour or less, do you need to go out and have the giant bagel for morning? No, you don't. But if you're going longer for an hour, or if you're going at a really high intensity, you do want to hit the carbs. While you do that, you want to stay away from fiber. You want to stay away from a lot of fat. Those things tend to sit in the stomach, break down very slowly, cause you to feel very full, maybe bloated, maybe gassy on your ride, very uncomfortable. So here's a quick example, again, kind of based that off of my husband. He chooses Accelerate. He just likes the flavor. So I should say that no one is paying me to put their products on here. I tend to actually make my own, so I don't usually use products, just a flavor preference. But here's just a quick and dirty rundown of carbs, protein, fat, and a nice example at the bottom. And it's basically fuel choices. Are you going to put, 89 into the Porsche Turbo? Probably not. right? And so 89, these are some decent foods here. I even included cookies and candy and whatnot in there. Those are kind of our everyday foods that when you're looking to kind of improve your performance or improve your enjoyment on the ride, you want to switch over and use kind of 91, right? These are kind of heart healthy, kind of heavier in carbohydrate, but healthy carbohydrate foods that also give you a lot of other nutrients. So, again, yes, we're focusing on calories and numbers, but the big picture is overall health. And we're trying to make sure that you deliver adequate vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals to every cell in your body, both on and off the ride. So you really want to choose the 91 fuel column there. So how much fuel for your ride? This is going to be extremely different based on every person in this room, based on your needs, based on your METs. METs is really based on your basal metabolic rate. 1 MET is your body at rest. So when Strava or when Training Peaks tells you your METs, it's estimating based on your height, your weight, your age, your activity factor, and it is basically suggesting when you go on a ride, how many times, how would I explain this? I'm sorry. How much more work are you doing than your basal metabolic rate? So when you're just sleeping, when you're at rest, you burn, let's say, 1,000 calories. If you do 5 METs, you're burning 5 times that amount at rest. Does that make sense? If you're pushing 19 METs, you're working really hard. You're pushing 19 times the amount of energy to do that work than the work that you are doing it just at rest. And so that's METs for you. Watts are a little bit different. So this is one of the quickest ways to figure out how many calories you need during the ride, not during the day, but just during the ride. You take the number that's based on the compendium of physical activity. I included it as a resource on my last slide. You can just Google it. It's free public access. And what it'll tell you is based on the miles per hour that you generally do. So you do 12 miles per hour. It'll give you the METs that are associated with that based on large studies that have been done. They figure out approximately how much energy that requires. You multiply it by 3.5, and then your weight. You divide it by 200, and at the end you get kcals per minute. So I typed in my husband's needs, and let's just say at 12 METs, which is about 15 to 19 miles per hour. Multiply it by 3.5 and by his weight, divide it by 200, and he basically needs 15, almost 16 calories per minute. Multiply that by 60, he's approximately burning 945 calories per hour, and that's for a 165-pound man. Right? And again, that's just on the ride. That's not when he's off the ride, but just on the ride. So he needs to replace, ideally, you can't eat, I'm not going to ask you guys to eat calorie for calorie on the bike. There's no way you're going to eat a Big Mac and fries and a shake when you're on the bike for an hour. Wouldn't want you to do that. But just to show you how metabolically active your body is when you're on the bike. So for a 2-hour ride, let's say he keeps that pace up approximately for 2 hours, he needs about 4,290 calories when I add the ride on to his normal average day, because his average day again was around 2,400. Right? So for ride days, he needs around 4,200, 4,300 calories a day. On non-ride days, 2,400. So you can see the significant difference there. But I'm, again, bringing in honor your hunger first, calorie second, because certainly I'm not going to be like, oh, you only ate 3,200 calories. You still need, another 1,000. And he's like, I'm not hungry. I'm so full. I'm like, I'm going to eat it. That's not going to happen, right? So you need to honor your hunger. And you'll notice that on days when you're really riding hard, you're not going to be that hungry. Oftentimes you're kind of queasy, a little nauseous maybe. You're not hungry right after the ride. You need a couple hours to cool down. Then maybe the hunger kicks in. Right, so it's not that you need to pack all of those calories into a finite period of time. Your body works in averages, right? It doesn't work in a 24-hour spot. It's not like, we're 1,000 calories deficit in this 24-hour time period, so we're going to lose a half a pound. It doesn't work like that, right? Everything's kind of spread out over averages. I know I'm running short on time, so I'm going to get through the next few slides here. So fueling in the saddle, just like hydration, we have some guidelines that we try to follow. If you're riding for less than an hour, you generally don't necessarily need water. We recommend it. It's always good to have water there. You never know if you're going to flat or who knows what. It's nice to have some water there, but do you absolutely need it? No. Does your tissues need it? Are you going to bonk? No. But that's assuming that you're going into your ride semi-hydrated. If you're going into your ride dehydrated, then yes, you're going to want to consider taking some water with you. Do you need carbohydrate in those 60 minutes? No. Sometimes I need caffeine on my ride to work. So sometimes I'm the rider with like the coffee, but I'm not doing it for an energy purpose, and my ride is certainly not longer than 60 minutes here. So if you're riding for about 1 to 2 hours, we recommend about 30 grams of carbohydrate being replaced through some kind of fluid or food. You could do it either way, right? You can drink it in the shape of orange juice, so you could drink it in a sports drink, or you can do it with water and then eat 30 grams of carbohydrate, right? Which would be approximately 1 goo, or sport beans, or it could be half a bagel, right? So you can choose which way, if you want to drink it versus eat it. If you go for a little bit longer, you can see how the numbers actually double, or go up by 50%, excuse me. And then I've just given you some samples on the side. Again, there's people that are very loyal to engineered foods or sports foods, but I've also given you some examples of how to do it with just normal foods. And it's just certainly based on tolerance, which leads me to my next slide, that tolerance is absolutely king of the mountain when it comes to eating and drinking on your rides. Yes, I'm giving you lots of numbers, but if you can't tolerate it, it's not worth anything, right? And again, this is something that needs to be built up. You need to do some trials and tribulations with your hydration and your nutrition on the rides. To see what your body can tolerate. There's a lot of folks that can tolerate orange juice on an empty stomach when they're riding for 2 hours, and there's certainly a lot of folks that can't and do much better with Accelerate or Powerade or one of those drinks. Because we all know, I think many people, if you've gone for longer than an hour or so, it's common to get GI distress. I think about 15% of cyclists generally experience some kind of stomach discomfort on their rides, largely due to either dehydration, overnutrition, eating too much or drinking too much, also undernutrition, eating too little or drinking too little. So again, just like hydration, where you need to build it into as a habit, we recommend kind of practicing nutrition on the bike. And for the professional athletes that I work with, it is one of the toughest things to do. It's to practice. You never want to sacrifice your performance by trying to do a new food, but certainly recommend it before you join a competitive event. So lastly, fueling for recovery, we have a mantra in my office that your workout is not finished until you've refueled. Most people get off the bike, done with that, let's go on with the rest of the day. Sorry, even if you're an amateur cyclist but you're looking to gain performance, you're certainly not done until you've refueled. And refueling generally means that you're eating a couple hundred calories. You're eating some sodium, you're eating some carbohydrates, and maybe a little protein, a little bit of fat to replace the